Not that they aren't that good on a normal day, but I want to talk about the historical reliability of the New Testament. Since the evidence for Jesus' deity is furnished by the New Testament, it's obvious then that the New Testament documents must be considered as historically reliable sources of information. And the question comes, just what is our dependence on the New Testament? Well, brethren, we are totally dependent upon the New Testament for a personality portrait of Jesus Christ. It is impossible to reproduce the life and teachings of Christ from the total amount of information which comes to us down from the first century Greek, Roman, and Jewish writers. From these writings, we know precious little of Jesus, beyond the fact that he lived and was crucified at Jerusalem by Pontius Pilate. Now, what this means in terms of authentic representation of what Jesus actually said and did is this: that neither historian nor theologian can say with any authority whatsoever that Jesus said or did anything without an appeal to the New Testament. And so let's take a look now at the New Testament and the historical context. First of all, the New Testament is not a myth. Myths, like Little Red Riding Hood, happened once upon a time in a faraway place. And of course, that type of statement cannot be located in time and space. And friends, our New Testament does not at all resemble that kind of literature. In the second place, the New Testament is history. History. It's written in a space-time dimension. Or in other words, it's written in historical context that specifies those times, persons, places, and events which offer themselves for verification. Other documents contemporary with the New Testament verify its accuracy in regard to such statements concerning the morals, the politics, culture, economics, religion, and etc. of that particular period of history. And of course, we have archaeology that has added its findings as corroborating testimony to the accuracy of the New Testament. And this brings us to number 3, and what we call the acid test. To me, this is the big one, the acid test. You see, our New Testament books have passed the acid test for authenticity of any document of antiquity. What are we saying? Well, they were, and here's the key, written in the same generation in which the events took place, and were circulated among the very people about whom these documents spoke while they were still alive to deny them. Think about that. And the fact that these very people preserved the New Testament for posterity shows their regard for the genuineness of its contents. Now, let's look at some illustrations of the historical context of the New Testament. Point letter A. Let's begin with the letters of Paul. Now, these are the earliest writings of the New Testament. 10 of Paul's letters had been written and circulated before the traditional date of Mark's Gospel in AD 60 to 62 AD. His letters abound in historical references which are intricately bound up with his doctrine. Number one, Galatians chapters 1 and 2 present some of the major events in Paul's life before his conversion to 17 years after his conversion. These are laid out in chronological sequence as historical proof of his claim to have received the gospel directly from Jesus and that he was therefore an apostle. Let me read quickly Galatians 1, verses 13 and 14. This is Paul. For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. Number two, there is reference by Paul to over 500 people who saw Jesus alive after the crucifixion, and that Paul affirmed were still alive and readily available for confirmation. Brethren, these were offered as an evidence of the resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15, 5 and 6. And so Paul's saying, check it out. Check it out for yourself. Number three, there are references by Paul to people who obviously were known by his readers. And Romans 16, 1 through 23 shows us where Paul greets a lot of these people by name. And there are many other verses like this. Number four, there are the references by Paul to sister congregations engaged in relief activities among the disciples. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. These statements and many others like them lift the context of Paul's letters completely out of the realm of invention or myth. In addition, his references to geography, contemporary cultural procedures, the moral, religious, and political conditions of the day, all of this combines to produce a context which must be considered as factual. Point B, letter B. Let's consider the Gospels and Acts. Christianity became a system of life and action amid the Jewish and Roman societies of the first century. And it was of such momentous consequences to those cultures that they reacted with great anxiety toward both its doctrine and its adherents. And friends, every historian who deals with those forces which he supposes contributed to the shape of civilization must decide what ancient documents are trustworthy and those which he believes offers him the most abundant source of reliable information. And brethren, without exception, they rely on the Gospels, the book of Acts, and also Paul's writings without exception. Number one, Luke opens his account to Theophilus, who was a Roman official, by assuring him that the material he's about to read had been carefully researched and secured from eyewitnesses. That the material he is about to read had been carefully researched and secured from eyewitnesses. That the material was accurate and that the events were presented in order of their occurrence. Then Luke states the reason for such precision of research and accuracy of writing, when in Luke 1:4 he states, that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Number 2, in Luke 2:1-7, the birth of Jesus is set squarely in the context of historical first century Palestine. Number 3, Matthew 3:1 and following, Mark 6:14-20, Luke 3:1 and 2, and John 1:19-37 all speak of the ministry of John the Baptist. Recorded is the content of his preaching, his diet, his clothing, his boldness toward the Jews and Herod who knew him. His activities are located from the city of Jerusalem to along the river Jordan where he baptized. Herod the Tetrarch knew John and held a certain fearful respect for him. And the point is that such widespread activity and fame would have a lasting effect upon the residents of Palestine and would make it basically impossible to believe that any one of the gospel accounts could have been circulated as reliable reports among so many people in Palestine if the things concerning John the Baptist were not true. And in addition, church, every political and religious figure mentioned in Luke 3:1 and 2 has been mentioned in other writings from the same period. Not the Bible, other writings. Brethren, no half-smart inventor would tie his story to so many known persons and places if he was making any attempt to deceive. It would be a ridiculous, futile effort. Number 4, the life and ministry of Christ did not take place in an historical vacuum. It embraced the great masses of people in Palestine, from Galilee to Judea, during the time of the Roman occupation of Palestine, when the Herodian rule was replaced by direct Roman administration from 6 AD. Many persons, places, events, weddings, temples, valleys, mountains, rivers, feasts, and cities defined the historical setting of Jesus' life. The accuracy of the geography and intimacy of knowledge of the culture of the land, the language, the religious and political peculiarities of both Jews and Gentiles, all confirmed in other documents from the same period of history, should be sufficient for any person seriously investigating the historical reliability of the New Testament. Number 5, the beginning and spread of the Church of Christ is traced from Jerusalem to Rome while opposed by the Jewish hierarchy. And it involves Roman proconsuls like Sergius Paulus and Galileo, and Roman governors like Felix and Festus. It involved imperial decrees, as seen in Acts 18:1 and 2. It involved the rioting over Christianity's threat to idolatry in Greece, Acts 19. And the establishment of a new religion, which was referred to as a sect, everywhere spoken against, as presented in the history book called Acts, in chapter 28-22. All of which could not have been invented in one generation and then passed off on the people of that same generation who knew better. It would have been impossible to have fabricated an account of Christianity and to have successfully pawned it off on that same generation of people as it would be for a present-day writer to fabricate a story of a Japanese invasion of California in the early months of World War II, and then to have located the invasion landing at Long Beach in June of 1942. And then to top it off, to have invented certain events and speeches which were supposed to have taken place among the very people who actually lived in Long Beach at the time. Some of whom, well, I don't know, maybe, some of whom might still be alive today to deny the truth of that invasion story. It was just, 2 or 3 weeks ago? They had another celebration over at Normandy, and there was a few World War II vets still alive. I mean, I don't know what we're down to. Has anyone heard? Is there a few hundred left still living? But the point is, there's still people alive that could refute that story I just told you. That the Japanese invaded California, Long Beach. It would be equally difficult to fabricate today a story of Elvis Presley as being president of the U.S. in 1968, and that the capital was in Nashville. I'm not going to ask for hands, but I'm going to say there's a couple of people in this room that even went to an Elvis Presley concert back in the day. And if you didn't, you at least lived back then and know that I'm not telling the truth. Elvis was not the president and Nashville was not the capital. I mean, how in the world would you circulate a story like that through the U.S. among the very people who were alive at the time and able to very adequately deny such a story with reliable facts? Friends, the point is this. The New Testament writings could have had no better chance of survival than these illustrations if their contents were mere figments of the imagination. Church, what's the logical conclusion that we must draw? It's very simply this. The New Testament documents are certainly not myths. They were written in the sane and sober appearance of history. The authors ask us to believe that their accounts are true, and they come up reliable upon every single investigation. You see, until it can be proven that these writers of the New Testament were fakes, then their documents are going to have to be received as what? As historically reliable. And finally, read with me in John 19, verse 35. John 19, verse 35, when John speaks of Jesus' crucifixion, he says, "The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe." Chapter 20, verses 30 and 31 says, "Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may what? That you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." And so, based on the historical facts, what will you do with Jesus? Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ? Jesus says, "He that believes and is baptized will be saved." Do you believe Jesus is the Son of God? If so, then obviously you'll do what he says. Won't you come forward right now while we stand and sing?